Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 5, and today we have a story about love, sacrifice, and a truth that stayed hidden for years. Sometimes life changes in a single unexpected moment, and today's guest experienced exactly that. Are you ready to share your story with us?
Yes, I think I am. It all started on a very ordinary afternoon. I was driving through the city in my car, thinking about work and meetings. My life was stable, successful even. I had a business, a comfortable life. Everything seemed in order.
And something suddenly caught your attention?
Yes, I stopped at a red light, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man on the sidewalk, bending down to pick up aluminum cans from the street. He crushed one under his foot and threw it into a plastic bag.
That's something we see in many cities, but it affected you deeply. Why?
Because when I looked closer, my heart almost stopped. The name came out of my mouth before I could even think. Roberto.
Roberto?
My ex-husband.
Wait, your ex-husband was the man collecting cans on the street?
Yes. I couldn't believe it. I slammed on the brakes so suddenly that the driver behind me honked for several seconds. But I didn't care about the traffic or the noise. My eyes were fixed on him.
What did he look like?
Completely different from the man I remembered. His beard was gray and messy. His shirt was probably white once, but now it was stained with dirt and sweat. The sun was burning down on him, and his back was curved, like he was carrying the weight of the world.
That must have been a shock.
It was. Roberto used to be a respected history teacher. His clothes were always perfectly ironed, and he smelled like that woody perfume he loved. Students admired him. He loved books, classical literature, quiet Sunday mornings.
And now he was surviving on the street.
Exactly. I quickly parked the car and stepped out. My hands were shaking as I removed my seatbelt. For a moment, I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was perfect, my makeup light and elegant. I was wearing expensive linen clothes.
Two completely different lives standing a few meters apart.
Yes, 10 years of marriage, and now we were strangers living in different worlds.
Did he notice you?
When I closed the car door, the noise made him look up. Our eyes met.
And you were sure it was him?
Completely sure. Those brown eyes, even surrounded by deep wrinkles and dark circles, I could never forget them.
How did he react when he saw you?
Not the way I expected. Instead of smiling, he looked terrified.
Terrified?
Yes. He grabbed the bag full of cans and tried to walk away quickly, almost tripping over his own feet, like he wanted to escape.
Escape from you?
Exactly.
What did you do?
I ran after him without thinking. My heels were hitting the hot pavement as I shouted, "Roberto, please wait!"
Did he stop?
I finally caught his arm before he turned the corner. His skin was rough, burned by the sun. He stopped, but he kept his head down, like he was too ashamed to look at me.
That must have been heartbreaking.
It was. I could smell the street on his clothes, sweat, dust, and something about it made my chest tighten with sadness. Not disgust, just sadness.
What was the first thing he said to you?
His voice was hoarse. He said, "Maria, what are you doing here? Please, just let me go."
Let him go? After finding him like that?
Exactly. I looked at him and said, "Roberto, look at yourself. What happened to you?" My voice was shaking.
And did he answer?
Not really. He tried to pull his arm away, but I held it tighter. 5 years earlier, we had divorced. It wasn't a huge fight. We simply drifted apart. I rebuilt my life. I remarried. I built my business.
And you assumed he had done the same.
Yes, I imagined he was teaching at another school, living a peaceful life. Never in my worst nightmare imagined finding him like that.
So, what explanation did he give?
He finally said quietly, "Life turns in strange ways, Maria. That's all."
That sounds like someone hiding something.
That's exactly what I thought. I pointed to the bag on his shoulder and said, "You call this turning things around? Roberto, you're collecting trash in the street."
Did he tell you where he was living?
After hesitating, he said there was a public shelter near the central square. They gave soup at night and a mattress to sleep on.
A shelter.
Yes, hearing that broke my heart.
What did you do next?
I opened my purse and took out all the money I had. I held it out to him and said, "Please take this. Let me help you."
And did he accept?
No, he stepped back immediately and shook his head.
He refused?
Completely. He looked at the money, then at me, and said something that shocked me.
What did he say? He refused your help, even though he was living on the street?
Yes. I told him he was being proud, that it wasn't charity. I said he clearly needed help. But he looked at me calmly and said something I will never forget.
What did he say?
He said, "I'm not begging. I work. I collect these cans, sell them at the scrapyard, and buy my food. It's honest work. It's what I have left."
Wow, even in that situation, he still had dignity.
Exactly. And that only made everything hurt more. I started crying right there on the sidewalk. I asked him how his life could have fallen apart like that.
Did he explain?
Not really. I asked if he had gambled, if he had started drinking, if he had lost everything somehow. None of it made sense to me. Roberto had always been the most responsible man I knew.
So, what did he say?
He sighed and looked at the street, watching luxury cars pass by. Then he said quietly, "I did what needed to be done."
That sounds very mysterious.
It did. I asked what that meant. Nobody ends up homeless just because they did what needed to be done.
Exactly.
Then he gave a sad little laugh and said something else. He said schools don't hire teachers with the kind of problem he had now.
So he had lost his job too?
Yes, that shocked me even more. Roberto loved teaching. It was his passion, and he had always had a perfect reputation.
So hearing that must have been unbelievable.
It was. I told him I wasn't leaving until he explained everything. My car was nearby, and I asked him to come sit somewhere with air conditioning and drink some water. He looked exhausted.
Did he agree right away?
No, he looked at my car and then at his dirty clothes. He said, "I'm going to ruin your leather seats. Your new husband won't like that."
Ouch.
I ignored that comment and told him the car was mine and my husband was my problem. Then I told him to get in.
And he finally accepted?
Yes, slowly, like he had no energy left to argue.
Where did you go?
I drove to a small bakery far from the busy streets so we could talk privately. During the whole drive, he stared out the window, silent.
What were you thinking at that moment?
My mind was spinning. I kept asking myself what could possibly destroy a man's life so completely in just a few years.
And you were about to find out.
I thought so, but the truth would take much longer to appear.
What happened inside the bakery?
We sat at a corner table. I ordered coffee with milk and a simple grilled bread for him.
And how did he react to the food?
That's when my heart broke again. He tried to eat politely, wiping his mouth with a napkin after every bite, but the hunger was obvious. He devoured the bread like he hadn't eaten properly in days.
That must have been painful to watch.
Very painful. Roberto was the man who once taught me about wine and literature. Now his hands were trembling while holding a cup of coffee.
After he finished eating, did you ask your questions?
Yes, I waited until he finished. Then I looked at him and said softly, "Roberto, now please tell me the truth. How did you lose our house, our car? What happened after the divorce?"
And what did he say?
He looked down at the empty cup and slowly turned the saucer with his rough fingers. Then he said that things had started going wrong after the divorce.
Wrong how?
He said the divorce was expensive, that he had taken on some responsibilities and made bad investments. According to him, everything became a snowball of debt.
Did that explanation make sense to you?
Not at all. We were teachers. We had stable salaries, but we weren't rich investors losing millions in the stock market.
So you challenged him.
Yes, I reminded him that in the divorce, we divided everything equally. I asked him what responsibilities he was talking about.
And what did he answer?
He said he had taken responsibility for the remaining debts so that I could move forward freely with my life.
But you didn't remember any debts.
Exactly. The only debt we had was the apartment mortgage, and we sold the apartment and paid it off.
So his story didn't add up.
Not even a little. When I pointed that out, he suddenly became tense. Then he stood up abruptly from the chair.
Just like that?
Yes, the chair scraped loudly against the floor. He thanked me for the coffee and said it was the best meal he had had in weeks, but that he needed to leave.
Leave already?
He said he needed to get back to work collecting cans before the scrapyard closed.
Did you try to stop him?
I did, but he gently pulled away and walked out of the bakery without looking back.
And you were left there, with more questions than answers.
Exactly. I paid the bill and sat there for a moment, feeling that something much bigger was hidden behind his story, something dark, something he didn't want me to know.
And that feeling pushed you to start investigating.
Yes, I went home with my mind racing. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep until I discovered the truth.
What was the first thing you did?
I called an old colleague of ours who still worked at the school where Roberto used to teach.
So you decided to investigate his past. What did your colleague tell you?
I called Claudia, an old friend who still worked at the school where Roberto and I used to teach. I tried to sound casual when I asked why Roberto had left the school.
And what did she say?
At first, there was a long silence on the phone. Then she asked me something that made my stomach drop.
What did she ask?
She said, "Maria, you didn't know?"
That doesn't sound good.
Not at all. She told me Roberto didn't resign. He was fired.
Fired? For what?
She said there had been a quiet scandal at the school. Apparently, the administration received a judicial notice involving Roberto, something serious enough that they said they couldn't keep him as a teacher anymore.
A legal problem?
Yes, Claudia said there were legal processes involved, something related to a large debt with the government.
That must have been shocking to hear.
Completely shocking. Roberto was the most responsible person I knew. He kept every payment receipt for years. The idea that he had problems with taxes or the law felt impossible.
So you decided to dig deeper.
Exactly. After hanging up the phone, my hands were shaking. None of it made sense. Roberto afraid of debt? That was absurd.
What did you do next?
I went to the attic of my house. I had stored several old boxes there after my divorce. It took a while, but eventually I found a blue folder labeled Divorce Documents.
And you started reading everything again.
Yes, I sat on the floor, surrounded by dust and old papers, and read every line of the agreement we had signed years earlier. At that time, I had signed it quickly. I just wanted the pain of the separation to end.
And that's when you noticed something important.
Yes, there was a paragraph I had never really paid attention to before.
What did it say?
It stated that Roberto voluntarily assumed all fiscal, tax, and civil responsibilities related to the years between 2018 and 2020.
That sounds very specific.
Exactly. Too specific. I read it 3 times. Why would a teacher insist on taking responsibility for tax liabilities during those years?
Especially if you were both salaried workers.
Right. Our taxes were automatically deducted from our salaries. There shouldn't have been any complicated fiscal situation.
So something definitely didn't add up.
Not at all. That's when I decided I needed professional help.
A lawyer?
Yes. I called a tax attorney named Dr. Paulo. He was someone I knew through my business contacts.
What did you ask him to do?
I told him I wanted him to investigate Roberto's fiscal history. I said I would pay whatever was necessary. I just needed to understand what had happened.
And how long did it take?
2 days.
Only 2 days?
Yes, but they were the longest days of my life. I couldn't focus on work. I barely ate. I kept thinking about Roberto sleeping in that shelter while I slept in my king-size bed.
That contrast must have been haunting you.
It was, especially remembering how he refused my money with so much dignity.
So when the lawyer finally called you,
I answered immediately. My heart was pounding.
what did he say?
His voice was serious. He said, "Maria, the situation is worse than we thought."
Worse how?
Roberto had a tax debt of nearly 1 million reals.
1 million?
Yes, I almost dropped the phone. I asked how a history teacher could possibly accumulate that kind of debt.
And what was the explanation?
The lawyer said the debt came from a shell company that had moved large amounts of money without paying taxes.
Was Roberto the owner of that company?
That's the strange part. According to the documents, Roberto wasn't listed as the official partner of the company.
Then why was he responsible for the debt?
The lawyer explained that Roberto had legally assumed responsibility for it, almost like a guarantor or someone taking the blame.
That's very unusual.
It gets even stranger. When they analyzed the original digital documents used to create the company and perform the transactions,
Yes?
the operations were registered using the CPF of a woman.
A woman?
Yes, but in the final legal process, Roberto appeared confessing and taking full responsibility for everything in order to end the investigation against that woman.
So he sacrificed himself to protect someone else.
Exactly.
What did you think at that moment?
My first thought was terrible. I wondered if he had ruined his life to protect another woman.
That must have hurt.
It did. I asked the lawyer if he knew who the woman was.
And?
He said the records were confusing, but the digital trail pointed to someone very close to me, someone connected to family documents.
That must have made your heart race.
It did. Then the lawyer said something that changed everything.
What was it?
He said Roberto had thrown himself in front of a legal train to save someone else. He didn't commit the crime, but he paid the full price for it.
And that's when you started connecting the dots, tensely.
Yes, and the truth that began forming in my mind was terrifying.
So at that moment, you started connecting the pieces. What did you realize?
The lawyer mentioned the years 2018 to 2020, and suddenly a memory hit me. During those exact years, my father had been opening and closing strange businesses.
Your father?
Yes, my father always had questionable business ideas. Sometimes he asked to use my documents for bureaucratic issues. At the time, I didn't think much about it.
But now it started to make sense.
Yes, my heart began to race. I kept thinking, no, that's impossible. Roberto would never destroy his life for my father.
But you needed to be sure.
Exactly. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to my father's house. I didn't even go to work that day.
What were you feeling during the drive?
A mixture of anger, fear, and a desperate hope that I was wrong. My father had always been my hero growing up.
So imagining he might be responsible for Roberto's downfall must have been terrifying.
It was. When I arrived, I didn't even knock. I walked straight inside.
And where was he?
He was sitting in his favorite armchair, calmly reading the newspaper with his glasses on the tip of his nose.
That peaceful image must have contrasted a lot with everything you had just learned.
Completely. I had just seen Roberto on the street, dirty and hungry, and there was my father sitting comfortably in his living room.
What did he say when he saw you?
He looked surprised and said, "Maria, what happened? You look pale."
And you didn't waste time, did you?
Not at all. I threw the folder with the investigation documents onto the coffee table and told them to look at them.
That must have been intense.
I asked him directly, "What did you do between 2018 and 2020 using my CPF?"
And how did he react?
His face lost all color immediately. He didn't even need to read the papers.
So he already knew.
Yes. He slowly removed his glasses and stayed silent for a moment.
What did he finally say?
He started stuttering. He said he had business problems and couldn't get credit anymore because his name was already blacklisted.
So he used your identity.
Yes. I shouted at him. I asked if he had opened a fake company in my name and created a massive tax debt without telling me.
And did he deny it?
No. He lowered his head and admitted it.
That must have been devastating.
It was. He said it was supposed to be temporary. He believed the business would recover and he would pay everything before anyone noticed.
But things didn't go as planned.
Exactly. The government audit happened too quickly. He lost control of the situation.
But there was still one big question.
Yes, I asked the most important question of all.
Which was?
Where does Roberto fit into this story?
And what did your father say?
He sighed deeply and said Roberto discovered everything while organizing documents for our income taxes.
So Roberto confronted him.
Yes. My father said Roberto was furious. He had never seen him that angry before.
Did Roberto threaten to report him?
Yes. Roberto said he was going to report the crime.
But he never did.
No.
Why not?
Because my father told him what would happen to me if the investigation continued.
What do you mean?
On paper, the company belonged to me. The signature was mine. Even though it was falsified, the authorities would initially treat me as the responsible person.
So you could have been arrested.
Yes, my father told Roberto that my career, my reputation, everything would be destroyed.
And that's when Roberto made his decision.
Exactly.
What did he do?
He went to the tax authorities and to the lawyers, and he confessed to everything.
He said the crime was his?
Yes, he told them he had used my documents without my knowledge. He said I was innocent.
That means he took the entire blame.
Everything. The debt, the legal consequences, the criminal record.
That's an unbelievable sacrifice.
My father told me Roberto sold everything he had. His part of the apartment, his car, his savings. Everything went to lawyers and fines.
And even that wasn't enough to pay the debt?
No. And because of the criminal case, his teaching career was destroyed. No school wanted to hire a teacher accused of fraud.
So he lost his profession, his money, and eventually his home.
Yes, and the worst part is, he never told me.
Never?
No, my father said Roberto made him promise never to reveal the truth.
Why would he do that?
Because Roberto believed that if I knew, I would try to take the blame myself to protect my father, or to be fair.
And he didn't want that.
Exactly, and there was one more reason.
What was it?
Roberto said he didn't want me to hate my own father for the rest of my life.
Wow.
So he allowed me to think he was irresponsible, that he had ruined his own life.
While in reality, he was protecting you.
Yes, protecting my freedom and my family.
What did you feel when you heard all of that?
My chest felt like it was being crushed. The man I thought had failed in life was actually the most honorable person I had ever known.
And at that moment, you understood the truth about Roberto.
Yes,
But what did you decide to do next?
I knew exactly what I had to do.
After hearing all of that from your father, what did you do?
I felt sick. Everything inside me was spinning. The man who had saved my life was sleeping on the street, while I had spent years judging him.
That must have been incredibly painful to realize.
It was. I looked at my father and asked him one more question. I asked if he knew Roberto had ended up living on the street.
And what did he say?
He said he didn't know things had gotten that bad. He thought Roberto had moved to the countryside.
But that didn't change what had happened.
No, not at all. I couldn't listen to him anymore. I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door.
Did he try to stop you?
Yes, he called after me asking where I was going.
And what did you tell him?
I said, I'm going to fix the mistake you made and honor the man who sacrificed his life for me.
That sounds like a powerful moment.
It was the moment everything inside me changed. Part of me felt like it had died, but another part had just woken up.
And you had a mission now.
Exactly. I couldn't change the past, but I could change Roberto's future.
Did you go straight back to him?
Not immediately. I had one more thing to resolve first.
Your current husband.
Yes. When I arrived home, he was sitting on the couch talking on the phone and laughing.
Did he know about Roberto?
Apparently, he did. As soon as he saw me, he hung up and made a sarcastic comment.
What did he say?
He said, "So the saint finally came back. Did you give some coins to your ex-husband, the beggar?"
That's cruel.
It got worse. He said he had been telling a friend how pathetic it was that someone could fall so low. He said people like Roberto deserved that kind of life because they lacked ambition.
After everything you had just learned, that must have been the last straw.
Exactly. For the first time, I looked at Carlos and truly saw him. A man obsessed with appearances, incapable of understanding sacrifice or real love.
What did you say to him?
Very calmly, I told him to leave my house.
Just like that?
Yes, he laughed at first because he thought I was joking, but I repeated it. I said it was over.
And did he finally believe you?
Yes, my voice was so cold that it scared him. While he packed his things, complaining and insulting me, I felt something surprising.
What was that?
Relief.
Relief?
Yes, for the first time in years, I felt free.
What did you do after that?
I called my bank. I looked at my investments, my jewelry, my luxury car, all the things I once thought were important. Suddenly, they felt meaningless.
And that same night you went back to the square?
Yes, it was already dark and the air was cold.
Were you able to find Roberto?
I did. He was sitting on a concrete bench, wrapped in a thin, dirty blanket.
What happened when he saw you?
He stood up immediately, worried. He asked why I was there at night and said it was dangerous.
And what did you do?
I didn't answer. I just walked up to him and hugged him.
After all those years?
Yes, I hugged him tightly, without caring about the dirt or the smell or the people watching us.
How did he react?
At first, his body was stiff, like he didn't understand what was happening. But then he broke down and started crying on my shoulder.
That must have been emotional.
It was. I whispered to him that I knew everything. I told him I had spoken to my father and discovered the truth.
How did Roberto react when he realized you knew?
He looked terrified. He said my father should never have told me.
Why?
Because he said he had done it by choice and that I didn't owe him anything.
And what did you say?
I held his face in my hands and told him the truth. I told him he had saved my life, my freedom, my future.
That must have been overwhelming for him.
It was. I told him the sacrifice was over, that he would never spend another night on that square again.
Did he accept your help this time?
At first, he resisted. He said he didn't want charity.
And how did you answer that?
I told him it wasn't charity, it was justice.
Justice.
Yes, he had protected me when I didn't even know I needed protection. Now it was my turn to protect him.
So what happened next?
That night, I took him to a hotel. For the first time in years, Roberto took a hot shower and slept in a clean bed.
That must have been the beginning of a huge transformation.
Yes, but the hardest part was still ahead.
What do you mean?
I had to give Roberto his life back.
The last time we spoke, you had just taken Roberto to a hotel after years of him living on the street. You also said the hardest part was still ahead. What did you mean by that?
Saving someone from the street for one night is easy. Giving them their life back, that's the real challenge.
Because the damage wasn't just financial.
Exactly. Roberto had lost everything: his career, his confidence, his sense of identity. He wasn't just a man without money. He was a man who believed his life was already over.
That must have taken time to rebuild.
It did. The next morning, after he woke up in that hotel room, he looked almost ashamed to be there.
Ashamed?
Yes, he kept saying he didn't deserve that kind of comfort anymore, that people like him should learn to live with the consequences of their mistakes.
But the mistake wasn't really his.
Exactly, and that's when I told him something very important.
What did you say?
I told him the truth always finds its way back to the surface, even if it takes years.
So, what was your plan?
First, I contacted a very good lawyer. I wanted to reopen the case and prove that the fraud had never been Roberto's responsibility.
Was that possible after all those years?
Difficult, but not impossible, especially because I now had my father's confession.
Your father agreed to testify?
At first, he resisted. He was terrified of the legal consequences. But I told him something very clear.
What was that?
I told him that if he didn't tell the truth, I would.
That must have been a powerful moment.
It was. For the first time in my life, I stopped protecting my father's mistakes.
And what happened next?
Weeks later, the legal process began again. My father officially admitted that he had used my identity to open the company and falsified my signature.
That changed everything.
Completely. Roberto's confession from years earlier suddenly looked very suspicious to the investigators.
Because there was no financial benefit for him.
Exactly. The lawyers were able to demonstrate that Roberto had taken the blame to protect me.
Was his criminal record cleared?
Yes. Months later, the court officially recognized that Roberto had not committed the fraud.
That must have been an incredible moment.
It was one of the happiest days of my life. When the judge read the decision, Roberto just sat there silently, with tears running down his face.
Years of suffering finally ending.
Yes, but there was still one more step.
His career?
Exactly. I contacted the director of the school where Roberto used to teach. I showed him the court decision and explained everything that had happened.
And how did the school react?
The director was shocked. He said Roberto had always been one of the best teachers they had ever had.
So, did they offer him his job back?
Not only that, they asked him to return as a senior teacher and mentor for younger staff.
That's incredible.
The first day Roberto walked back into that school, I think he was more nervous than the students.
I can imagine.
But when the students recognized him and started clapping, he broke down crying again.
After everything he went through, that must have meant the world to him.
It did, and little by little his life started rebuilding itself.
What about you two?
For a long time, we simply rebuilt our friendship.
That makes sense.
We had both changed a lot. Years had passed. Pain had left marks on both of us.
But something was still there?
Yes, respect, gratitude, and a kind of love that had survived everything.
Did that love ever become something more again?
1 year later, Roberto invited me for dinner.
Was it a special occasion?
Yes, it was the anniversary of the day we first met many years ago.
That's meaningful.
At the end of dinner, he looked at me and said something I will never forget.
What did he say?
He said, "I spent years thinking I had lost everything, but now I realized I was only protecting what mattered most.
And what was that?
Me."
Wow.
Then he asked if I believed that two people could find their way back to each other even after life had taken them down very different paths.
And what did you answer?
I said yes.
And today?
Today, we live a very simple life. Roberto teaches again. I still work in my profession.
Are you married again?
Yes, but this time there are no luxury apartments, no expensive cars, no need to impress anyone.
Just peace.
Exactly. Just peace and the quiet knowledge that real love sometimes hides behind the greatest sacrifices.
That's an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
Thank you for listening.
And to everyone listening right now, sometimes the truth takes years to appear, but when it does, it can change everything.